May's monthly build is late, but let's not harp on that. It still should be a great all-around mid-range to high-end system, and I tried to pack in a whole bunch of RGB lighting to make half of you really happy and half of you hate me forever. So for those of you still watching, let's build this thing. Ready to dive into custom water cooling but unclear about what parts you might need? Check out Thermaltake's new M360 Plus RGB kit. Featuring a D5 pump res combo, 16mm hard tube, Pacific C Pro fittings, and the best RGB implementation on the market, the M360 Plus fits all mainstream Intel and AMD sockets and is fully expandable as your system evolves. Check out the link in the video description to learn more. I'm going to start going over our parts for this month's build by looking at the case, which is actually down there and not on the table. It's not often, actually I think it's probably never, that I build a system in a case that I've featured before in a monthly build. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about taking on these mini projects every month. Every build is unique and appeals to different people in different ways. But when I was planning out May's system and decided I wanted an RGB sub-theme, I honestly wasn't sure which chassis to use. I haven't yet used the Define R6 or the NZXT H500 in this series, but those cases, although excellent in their own rights, are decidedly not RGB friendly. It was about this time that Corsair reached out to me and asked if I'd like to take a look at their new Carbide Spec Omega case. And my reply was a little confused, I guess. I already built in that case in March. I didn't really need another one. But as I scrolled down the product spec sheet, I saw that this RGB version comes with not only an RGB LED strip along the front, but two HD RGB fans and a lighting controller around back. Similar in form, sure, but I think we can make it look different enough this time around. To go with our Spec Omega, I'm going to toss in 3 more HD 120 RGB fans for the full I'm looking into the sun effect when peering through the tempered glass window, and these should pair nicely with the lighting controller already mounted to the back of the motherboard tray. There shouldn't be any problems syncing everything up, so that's another bonus. The core of our system will be the new Ryzen 2nd generation processor, the 2600. When doing my launch review of these chips, I very specifically wanted the 2600 over the 2600X, as the 1600 was my favorite processor to come out last year. It offered basically all the performance of the 1600X for less money and was easily overclockable to boot. You could game on it, you could produce content on it, you could render on it. It was a real workhorse. In testing, the 2600 proved to be basically everything the 1600 was and more, with higher clock speeds and better overall performance in every task. I understand the temptation to go for the slightly higher clock 2600X if you're starting your own build, but my advice is to shave $20 or so towards your processor and put it towards memory or something like that. Now, speaking of memory, this is Patriot's new Viper RGB memory kit. This is the DDR4 3000 version, which should allow us to clock up somewhere in the neighborhood of 2933 MHz. We're running dual channel with 2 8GB DIMMs. This is a brand new product that Patriot sent over, and from everything I've been able to gather, it should definitely have good compatibility with the X470 platform. It also has kick-ass RGB lighting that's controllable through ASUS's AuraSync software, which it just so happens we will have access to. This is the new ASUS Strix X470F gaming motherboard. It sports what ASUS calls Digi Plus VRM for precise voltage control and superior overclocking. It also has multiple M.2 slots for storage, an all-black aesthetic with RGB accents, 3 total RGB headers with one of them being addressable, and one of my absolute favorite newish features that's starting to gain traction, the built-in I/O shield. Plus, you get ASUS's Supreme FX audio, safe slot PCIe slots with SLI and Crossfire support, and USB 3.1 front panel connectivity. A freaking awesome total package for only around $200. It'll also go really well with our Strix graphics card, the always reliable GTX 1070. For those of you who have watched this series for a while, you know that I like to balance my systems as well as possible. For this build, I originally planned on an RX 580, but I don't have the Strix version of that card, and the 1070 likely matches our processor a little bit better anyway. Now that's not to say that the Ryzen 5 2600 wouldn't work great with a higher end card like Vega 64 or GTX 1080. In fact, I think if you have the dough, you should definitely go that route. However, I like to show off a variety of hardware on the channel, and the 1070 will do nicely here. Keeping our temps in check will be the responsibility of the CryoRig H7 Quad Lumi. This is the bling version of the classic H7 and was introduced last year by CryoRig. I haven't yet had a chance to test one out, but I have used the original many times and I really like the looks, performance, and the total value package it presents. A tower cooler like this should be perfect for our needs, as the 2600 isn't overly power hungry, and we should even be able to eke out a decent overclock here. For power, we're going to use our third Corsair component, the RM650i. 80 plus gold rated, fully modular with flat all black cables, the 650i is kind of the jack of all trades of the power supply world. This is the perfect wattage rating for any mid-range or even most high-end systems, and it comes with Corsair's 10-year warranty to boot. Power supplies are kind of like baseball umpires. When they're working right, you're not supposed to notice them. And in my experience, the RMI power supplies do a fantastic job of not being noticed. And lastly, storage. The Crucial MX300 SSD will do nicely, and although it's not impregnated with RGB LEDs, it's reliable and relatively affordable even at larger capacities, although I will link down below to the MX500 version instead, which is actually cheaper.
Is that everything?
Yeah, that's it. That's all the parts.
Well, why don't you put it together?
Yeah, alright, I'll build it. So as with the last time I used this case, the thing that I have the biggest beef with in this system is the cable management room around back. It's adequate, certainly, and using flat cables for the SATA power helps a ton, but the added cables from the RGB fans along with the pre-installed controller back here subtracted room from an already pretty tight situation, and I think if I was building anything more than a straightforward, basic air-cooled system in here, I might find myself cursing quite a bit. But once I was able to wedge on that back panel and hit the power button, the whole thing lit up like a freaking supernova, and I was partially blinded from all the RGBs firing out at me from the side window. After my pupils adjusted accordingly, I decided I really was digging the way everything came out. Even the basic black cables didn't stick out too badly as being in need of immediate replacement, and the RGB sync on the motherboard and GPU makes for a really cool effect and blends nicely with the H7's top plate, which I actually did just leave white. The case itself gives nice viewing angles from the front and the side, and offers a pretty cool accent trim with that RGB strip up front. When it comes to performance, there's not a whole lot to say that hasn't already been talked about over the last 2 years in regards to the GTX 1070. It's more than capable at 1080p Ultra gaming, and is more well suited for 1440p most likely. However, in this monthly build series, I always test at 1080p for consistency and direct comparison between systems. Due to cranking up the clock speeds on both the CPU and GPU, our frame rates were sitting pretty in every title, and productivity scores in Realbench were impressive. I think I was able to find the thermal limits of the H7, however, as at 4.1 GHz and 1.3 volts, we were sitting at the low 80s under load, a little higher than I'm comfortable with for Ryzen processors. Our memory had no issues keeping up though, as 2933 was achieved with one click in the BIOS. Overclocking Pascal cards is generally pretty easy, and although I didn't really need to for these tests, I still bumped up the core by 125 MHz and the memory by 275 MHz. Might as well, right? Overall, a great mid-range to high-end system, albeit one that has some serious price inflation hit it over the past few months. The 1070's price is thankfully headed back down to earth, but memory price remains stratospheric until who knows when. So do you agree with these parts choices? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, don't forget that I have a new Patreon. So if you think what I do on this channel is pretty cool, consider becoming a part of our growing community. Get subscribed if you are not already. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.